Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Brough Guitars Review. Today we're going to be talking about a story that's been 12 years in the making. A very, very long time. Now this story could go one of two ways. It could either go good or like on a historic level of just absolute awesomeness and talking about like a one-of-one type of story.
It was good. It was very, very good.
So this is very exciting to talk about, so please stick around through the whole episode because it's going to be a lot of suspense for just not only me, but you as well, because I don't really know where this is going to lead.
And I'm telling you, yes, I'm excited!
Because basically here in the next couple days, I'm actually going to go pick up a guitar that could possibly be a one-of-one. I'm talking like, it could be a barn find. Like, you know, where like antique hunt shows, you know, where they're just on the look for that one item that's just gonna really just set their whole experience apart from everything else. Or like a barn find, you know, you go look in this old barn and there's a tarp and you pull it back and it's this classic old vehicle that's just in absolute pristine shape, just a little dust on it. Something of that level could possibly be going on, and I am so excited to share this story with you. But in order for us to talk about this whole experience, we're going to have to start with no other than Eddie Van Halen. Eddie Van Halen has played an absolute slew full of guitars throughout his career, but in order to pick up and pinpoint exactly the date and time where this story is going to kind of begin for us, we're going to have to go all the way back to the very beginning when he was playing guitars like this, like his black and white Frankenstein guitar to start out, which eventually ended up becoming, you know, this one. So you have his red, white, and black Frankenstein, which is essentially the black and white one that just turned red. And we're not going to go every single one of his guitars, but you need to understand exactly where he started to where we're going to be at now, because I'm going to make reference on some of these guitars. So as Eddie was playing guitars like the two before, technically, which is really one guitar, his first sponsorship guitar where he actually got signed on by a company was with good old Kramer. So Eddie had a bunch of Kramers throughout his time, but then when he signed on with the very next company, he signed with a company known as Ernie Ball, where he played his Ernie Ball Music Man, which most would consider as his true first signature guitar that was actually released out to the public to be purchased. And this is the exact moment in time that I really want to pick up on, because pretty much in 1996, that specific year is when Eddie left Ernie Ball Music Man. About 1995, in 96 is when he joined a company known as Peavey, and then they released known as the Peavey Wolfgang. Now this is my Peavey HP2, but it's very close to the actual Wolfgang as far as looks and things like that. Just bear with me. Hold on a second, I'm going somewhere with this. So let's go all the way back to 1996. It's at the NAMM show. So for those of you that aren't familiar with what NAMM is basically the largest music convention in the world, where all these companies get together, they have all these booths, and then they talk about their products that are to come out throughout that year, and they'll be available for, you know, sale to customers and to companies and all of that. So NAMM's obviously a really big deal, and especially when you're sponsored by a company, or, you know, if you're putting your name on something, you want to be there seen with you yourself playing your product with your name on it. So in 1996, Eddie Van Halen was at NAMM on behalf of Peavey because that's who he had signed with pretty much like around 1995. So in 96, they come out with the Wolfgang. Now over here in this photo right here, I actually owned a Wolfgang Standard in all black. I've actually owned that guitar 2 different times, and I sold it 2 different times, and I regretted it 3 times. The math don't math, but that's how much regret I had every time I got rid of it.
You are the world's dumbest son of a bitch!
Neither here or there.
Shut up!
But I've been very fortunate to actually come across something, again, 12 years in the making, because 12 years ago I actually played a Peavey Wolfgang Standard that was not my own, but I got to play it, and it played fantastic. The best Wolfgang that I have played, best sounding Wolfgang I have played, hands down. And that goes probably across the EVH Fender line to really anything.
Damn!
It plays amazing, sounds amazing. There are no words. But I actually tried to buy that guitar years ago, wasn't able to grab it because this guitar was basically a crown jewel of a friend of mine. And I never thought that I would see this guitar ever again. But it's like a unicorn myth potentially because of how it's painted. And the reason why I bring that up is because in 1996, if you look at the YouTube footage of Eddie Van Halen actually playing at NAMM, you'll see in the background over here that there is a black, white, and red guitar there sitting there in the background, and it just looks different. It looked like nothing I had ever seen before, especially when you consider where Eddie had played from his Frankenstein to Kramer and this and that. He was kind of stepping away really from the striped guitars once he joined Music Man. Now, he had a Music Man that was, striped, such as this one. But again, these guitars were not on sale for people to be able to purchase, like normal consumers like you and I, or even guitar companies. So it led me to a lot of questions because that guitar I had played had a certain paint scheme on it, and it just led me down the rabbit hole to just kind of figure this out more, because not a lot of people, to my knowledge, have really said any stories, focused on the stories, or really dove into this particular striped guitar. But that's not really so much what I focus on. What I really want to focus on is the fact that Eddie was not selling any striped guitars up to this point. Now, there were companies trying to knock off of his name and this and that, and he sent all these lawsuit cease and desist letters. I've gotten one throughout my years myself.
You better lawyer up, asshole, because I'm not coming back for 30%. I'm coming back for everything.
But again, at that time, you weren't able to purchase these. So that means they either had to be custom ordered, if that was even allowed, if it was made as a prototype by somebody, if it was potentially Eddie Van Halen's himself, or if it was just a one-off that maybe someone had made in the shop and it managed to make it through the back door. Guys, this is what I'm talking about. This is crazy. This could potentially be an awesome find of a guitar, because this guitar happens to be a striped guitar. Now, I'm not going to spoil it just yet, because obviously this guitar has a story and it has a little bit of history behind it as well, and it's actually played a big role in my life, and I've now had an opportunity to acquire it yet again. So, moral of the story here is we're going to do a deep dive and figure out, is there more of these kind of striped guitars? The only two that I know of are the one on the hanger that is now located at a Hard Rock Cafe somewhere. And then also there's a Wolfgang Special that was Eddie's. So when you consider, there's 2 there, are there more? I don't know, but we're going to find out with some help with some friends. The good old internet is the research, and we're going to do a deep dive into this.
life was like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're gonna get.
I'm very excited. So basically here in a couple days, I'm gonna go to Barstow, California, and I'm gonna go take a drive out there. I'm gonna go get this guitar. I'm gonna bring it back here, and we're gonna look at it. But I absolutely love this guitar, so regardless of how this story turns out, I honestly am getting it back because of what it means to me, the funds are going towards. It's for a good cause. You know, the relationship building to see my old friend again, to reconnect with things that I've used on this guitar that actually helped me out in a very positive way. And that's really the main reason why I'm getting the guitar. But at the same time, I can't help but think to myself, could this be a one-of-one super special guitar? We're going to find out on Brough Guitars Review. Here we go.
Stay here. I'll be back.
Shit. Did I leave the stove on?
All right, my friends, we are back here at the house. We have the guitar case here in hand. Good old Peavey on it. I think it's about time we open it and take a look at this thing. Here we go. All right, my friends, here she is. 12 years I've been waiting for this instrument. Never thought I would get to hold this thing again, play it, smell it. Oh, it's a wonderful, wonderful day here in the Kyle household. I'm so beyond blessed. I'm so beyond thankful for this. I absolutely love this guitar. So to get into the guitar and how this whole thing came about, and why I say 12 years in the making, is because 12 years ago, a buddy of mine, his name was Ken, he was leading worship at a church known as Northside Christian Church in Clovis, California, which is next to basically Fresno for those of you that logistically care. Having said that, I'm playing through the first service, and I'm obviously don't have any of my rig, my guitars, my pedal board, nothing. I'm just using Ken's, and he had a Epiphone Les Paul, and it did the job. You know, like I said, I've never really been a huge Les Paul guy. I have my Les Paul that I have now that I love. I was playing his Les Paul, made it through the first service, and he tells me, hey, did you know that our drummer, his name is Sky, and he was the original owner of this guitar, but he said Sky is a huge Van Halen fan. Obviously. And so Sky and I are talking back in the green room, we're talking everything Van Halen, this and that, and he goes, hey man, I got a guitar that I'm going to bring for the next service that I really think you're going to like. And I was like, okay, cool, bring it. So he brings his Peavey case. It's before the second service. We're just sitting there chatting, and he's like, you got to see this. You got to see this guitar. And I mean, he talked about it like it was a long lost friend. This was his happy thought. And he opens the case, and I was just in shock. I had never seen a factory looking finished Wolfgang with this striping scheme. And obviously, for those of you that are Van Halen nuts, this striping scheme does look pretty familiar. Does it not? Looks vaguely familiar to me, because it's the 5150 paint scheme, except on a Peavey Wolfgang. I hold the guitar, and he goes, hey man, he goes, do you want to play it? And I was like, 100,000% I'd love to play this guitar. He goes, well, go ahead. He goes, tune it up and, go ahead and jam. And so I tuned the guitar up, and then I played the next service, and this guitar ripped. It's not a guitar that would necessarily scream for worship or church, but I did not care. I went ham on this thing, and it took everything I had not to just run out of that church and just steal it. I mean, I was in heaven, pun intended. And I was just having so much fun playing this guitar. But the one thing I recall about this guitar was how hot it sounded. It was a very loud guitar. It took any form of overdrive, distortion, and put it on 12, even if I wanted it on 2. I mean, the pickups were super hot. And I just remember how the neck felt and everything about it. And it just was a very special Wolfgang. It played different than the other Wolfgangs that I had come across, including my 2 Peavey Standards that I owned. And again, sold like an idiot.
Don't be afraid to ride the lightning.
But this guitar, I played and I even finger tapped in the service, because why not? It's a Van Halen guitar, and I literally finger tapped, and I was so appreciative of Ken for letting me just kind of do whatever I wanted to do musically. But I was in hog heaven, man. I was so happy to get to play this guitar and play it at church, of all places. That was just such an awesome thing. So after that church service, I'm talking with Sky, and I really wanted the guitar, and I was so broke at the time.
Oh my God. I am never gonna financially recover from this.
There's no way I could have made him a fair offer, but I remember I made him an offer, and he kindly said no.
I'm not going to negotiate that offer. That's the number I need.
He was a real good buddy. He was really cool about it. And I didn't ask any questions about the guitar, like where he got it or this or that. He was actually kind of asking me if I happen to know anything more about the guitar. And I mean, the paint job is such a professional paint job. Like, I wonder if this was a one-off or any kind of special guitar of any sort from that time. But because I hadn't seen it for 12 frickin' years, it just kind of slipped my mind. I never thought to think about it ever again, and that was that. I never thought I'd see it. So now, if you fast forward and you go 12 years later, I'm on Facebook of all things. Yes, I still use Facebook, folks. And I happened to see a posting by Sky that he was selling this guitar. I thought I was in a dream. And so I reached out to him immediately and still had his phone number. And I was like, hey, Sky, like, you're selling your guitar? And he was like, yeah, you know, I'm selling it. I'm you know, I don't want to disclose what it's for, but you know, he had something in mind. It was top 5 kindest acts of humanity that I've ever heard in my life. And I was like, I would like to have that guitar, man. And he was like, okay, you know, cool. Let's work out, you know, a price or this or that. And it was a very, very fair price. I'm not disclose how much it was because it's going to a really good cause, but we agreed on a price. And so he was like, hey man, you know, I'm in LA, I'm getting ready to do some shows. And so, cause I'm here in Vegas, he's like, let's meet up halfway and, you know, do the exchange. And I was like, I will be there. So get to Barstow, and obviously we're kind of reminiscing on old times and this guitar. And as a matter of fact, I even have the photo from the day that I saw the guitar 12 years ago still on my phone over here. And I was shocked that I even still had that photo. Like, it was just crazy how everything came full circle. And a YouTube video that I have, I think it's my second or third one, is actually the footage of me playing this guitar live at Northside. And the funny story about that is that I actually used that footage with this guitar to get accepted at Musicians Institute in LA, which is the whole reason why I even moved to California in the first place when I did, but 13 years ago. 13 years ago. So as we're reminiscing about this guitar, and we're sitting there just admiring it for what it is, obviously I had some questions about the guitar because, like I said, I didn't ask him, 12 years ago when I first had it in my hands. So I'm sitting there and I'm asking Sky, and I'm like, hey man, can you tell me more about this guitar? And he's like, yeah, I bought the guitar back, he thinks it was like in 2010 or 2011 from Guitar Center. And he said when he went to buy the guitar, now he can't remember exactly or recall exactly what he happened to pay for it, but he said he got it for a really good price because it was striped and that it had just kind of been there and no one wanted it. Then throughout the years, because this was his most prized possession, that he actually took it to Norm's Rare Guitars at one point. And if you guys aren't familiar, Norm's Rare Guitars is still around. They actually even have a documentary on Netflix. Watch it. It's great, especially if you're a guitar fan like myself. But obviously you wouldn't be watching this if you hate a guitar anyway, so you've probably already seen it. But Mike Lenmo, who's a worker at Norm's Rare Guitars, huge Van Halen fan, I guess Norm had offered Sky to purchase this guitar for Lenmo because he's obviously a huge Van Halen fan. And I know Mike Lenmo actually ended up getting to keep that 2007 Frankie on behalf of, I think it was Norm or whoever went in on it, but they were able to prize him with that. So I don't know if this was maybe offered, he made the offer, before he got that Frankie or after. I'm not really too sure, but man, that kind of gives this a little bit of history. The fact that even Norm would have won it, maybe not necessarily for himself, but even for an employee. That's awesome. So furthermore, another funny story about this guitar, it was such a prized possession for Sky that he said he had maybe only opened the case 2 or 3 times in these last 12 years, because you got to remember, he's a drummer. Yes, guy plays, but he's a drummer and he's also a professional musician, so he's always traveling and this and that. But he had this guitar underneath his bed, and he said he literally forgot about it for a few years until he happened to go back into his bedroom and happened to be cleaning and found the guitar case just sitting there underneath the bed. He says, like Christmas all over again. And I just thought that was a really funny story, because here I'm thinking, you have this guitar, and it's like you forgot you even had it. So it's kind of funny. Within the guitar and the guitar case, there was no build sheet, no background information on it. And the only thing that I happen to have to go off of is the serial number, which is actually branded here in the back of the headstock. And it does say, patent pending on the headstock, if you can freaking see. So obviously I knew it was a very early model, and I just kind of speculated if this maybe would have been like a refinished guitar, or was it a custom shop paint job, or was it repainted by just someone else? Because I mean, it is buffed out. It is a factory finish. It looks like a car finish. I mean, it looks absolutely perfect. So with the paint job being so nice, it led me down the rabbit hole to do a lot more research, obviously, because with this paint job and it being almost like a factory job, yes, there are people out there that are very talented that can do this kind of a paint job and make it look, perfect. So I wanted to kind of go back and just do as much research as I could to try to figure out, how did this paint job come to be? Now, according to Sky believes that it was a refinished paint job, and it used to be actually an all-black guitar and was refinished. But again, he bought the guitar as it is, so there's no real proof on that. And there's no overspray, there's no nicks, there's no pings, no tape marks. It's perfectly level. It's an insane paint job by whoever happened to do it. And as I said, it led me down the rabbit hole back to 1996, because if you actually watch that interview of Eddie during that NAMM and Hartley Peavey, they are both specifically asked by someone in the crowd saying, hey, when are you going to happen to make us some striped guitars so we don't have to stripe them ourselves? Because we as consumers and also business owners know that this would sell and people would buy. Eddie and both Hartley, kind of looked at each other and was just like, Eddie specifically said, I guess if that's something that, you guys want, then, why not? And then Hartley Peavey had replied basically, well, how many would you like? Kind of to deflect, and they all laughed. And then Eddie repeated it later again, yeah, how many would you want? And they kind of deflected it. But Eddie was super aware and very protective over his striping scheme colors on his guitars, which again, thus any guitars that had existed prior were not sold to the public. You had to either do it yourself, or you had to maybe pay someone else to custom paint it or something along those lines. So at some point, I basically wanted to run the serial number of this guitar and hope that maybe Peavey could kind of guide me down the pathway and maybe tell me a little bit more, make a phone call to him or whatever. But then I also have some friends that know some people that are deeply into Peavey, and both know people within Peavey during that prime time when Eddie was with Peavey and they were doing guitars. All right, so I want to bring up Johnny Bean. Now, Johnny Bean is a huge Van Halen fan. I've known of him for years. I have not met him personally, but he and I have messaged back and forth a couple times before. But the reason why I'm bringing him up is because another huge Van Halen fan, Jeremy Hefner, who really helped me out with a lot of the information regarding this guitar and finding out some things. Jeremy Hefner kind of turned me on to an interview that Johnny Bean had done back, I think it was like in 2022 or 2023, with no other than Jim DeCola. Now, Jim DeCola was basically the supervisor over guitar engineering for Peavey. He had been with him since 1988, but he was really responsible for the Wolfgangs from 95 up till year 2000. And again, we're really focusing on the year of 96, but we're bringing up this time range because this is going to give us a lot of insight and a lot of backstory and history on the guitar that I just got. In order to understand this more fully, at that time in 1995, Jim DeCola specifically was asked by Hartley Peavey to create no other than an exact replica of Eddie's Ernie Ball Music Man, because they wanted to entice Eddie to come over to Peavey. So they wanted to show, hey, we can make just as good of a quality instrument as Ernie Ball. Jim DeCola, who's also an Indiana Hoosier, go Hoosiers. But Jim DeCola came up with that prototype, and it looked something like this. There were a few slight differences in it, but again, it was to entice Eddie. So it piqued Eddie's interest. I guess Eddie had gone to Peavey at some point in time, and he looked at their Peavey Odyssey, which was kind of like a Les Paul guitar. And so they were kind of in the works of maybe coming up with something. And then Jim DeCola, I guess, had kind of already been working on, a body essentially. And so he kind of took the Odyssey as like inspiration, how it was kind of like almost like a Les Paul kind of looking guitar, or their version of a Les Paul. So Hartley Peavey specifically basically said, I want this guitar to look nothing like the Music Man, but also just be enough to want to get Ed's attention. So as you can see, the body's elongated. It's longer here at the horn. They kind of drop down the body here. And again, they made it an arch top like the Les Paul, because again, Hartley Peavey said he wanted to look nothing like the Music Man, but also to be slightly inspired by, to entice Ed.
Tomorrow you're going to be in trouble. I'm going to rip you into things. This is going to be a crop song I'm going to take away. I play for keeps.
So according to Jim DeCola, he wanted to kind of butter up Eddie essentially. And so he came up with a smaller version of the body of what we now know as the Wolfgang. But ironically, he was trying to make a smaller version for Wolfie, or Wolfgang, also known as Eddie Van Halen's son, the guitar it's named after. But he wanted to kind of get to Wolfie and then kind of have that warm Eddie's heart essentially, and then have Eddie kind of put the nail in the coffin to get him over to Peavey. So I guess Eddie had make a surprise stop at the shop. He saw the body and really was digging the body. And then I guess once it kind of became a full guitar, it was brought over to Eddie's house. Essentially, Eddie had hid the guitar and decided not to give it to Wolfie. When Wolfie left the room, Jim was like, I kind of figured you were going to give it to him. And then he was like, hey, is there any way you can make me this guitar full size? So now that Jim DeCola has the body, he had to come up with an idea for a neck. So the neck, the back profile specifically, is actually based off of Eddie Van Halen's Frankenstein guitar. Again, our black and white one that later became the black, white, and red one. Little fun fact that I didn't know. So to continue on with the neck, you'll notice here that it has this little cutout scoop in it that Peavey was known for, specifically with the Wolfgangs. And the reason why that's important is because I guess Jim was already working on a neck, and it was going to be on his own personal guitar that he was building for himself. And then Eddie kind of liked this V-shaped neck, but that was owned essentially by Gibson. He just basically cut out a little scoop in here, and then they just went ahead and left that open, and then painted the open face up here to kind of give it almost like that V look that Eddie liked. And it was the best of all worlds. And so basically now, since this was a completely different guitar than anything else, obviously there needed to be a patent for it. So Jim DeCola, Hartley Peavey, obviously we're going to be on the patent because Hartley Peavey he owned the company. Jim DeCola designed the guitar, so he wanted to be obviously on the patent. But then also Eddie wanted to be on the patent just for the sake of. One was patented for the body, the other one was patented for a headstock scoop, and then I'm not really sure what else it was patented on. I kind of forgot, to be honest. It was a lot of information.
Everybody knows you never go full retard.
Now, what makes the early Wolfgangs, very desirable, is on here on the back of the headstock. You'll notice that it says patent pending right here. And the patent pending ones is more so because of the D-tuna. This was kind of like a newer thing, and they're awaiting the patent on that. It was actually, I think it was later on his Music Man in like 95, but his Amber Quilt one. And that was just a prototype, but they were waiting on the patent when he had already come over to Peavey, and then that's why this one was patent pending. And the patent pending ones for, I believe, were from 1996 to 1998 on a 2-year run. But other than that, it's the exact same guitar, just like the rest of them. So the patent pending guitars, I guess a way to think about it is kind of like if you had like an error on a trading card or something that made it more valuable. Even though this wasn't an error, it was just waiting on the patent to be approved. So the body is a basswood body with a maple cap, and that's where you get that carp top right there. The neck is going to be a bird's eye maple neck, very pretty neck, and it's also baked very slightly. And if you smell it, that was one thing I always remembered about the Wolfgangs, specifically the standards, was the necks always smelled like baked wood, and anytime I'd get out of case, it just hit you in the face. And I remember the very first standard I had, I thought it was because someone was like smoking a cigarette or something and they had it in a smoking home. But then when I got my second one, I was like, oh no, that's just because that's how the neck was baked and prepped. So it smells absolutely wonderful. I love that smell of wood, burning wood, you name it. So according to Jim DeCola in the interview, the pickups here were designed to be like the DiMarzios, but just ever so slightly different. And I guess throughout the time, he had come up with many different pickup variations and kept sending them to Ed, but what actually ended up in the guitar, or the prototype, was the very first run that he gave him, just out of frustration because he had sent so many and Ed said that's not quite it. So he sent the very first ones he ever did, and then Eddie was like, that's it. And then that's ones that they ran with. And then according to Jim DeCola, actually those pickups are the same Wolfgang pickups that are actually used in Fender to this day. So Jim DeCola, I believe, was with Peavey from 1988 all the way up to year 2000. And so if you look at that time frame, especially because he was talking to Ed with 95, in 96 the Wolfgang actually came out, but in order to promote the Wolfgang, we're going to have to go back to that 1996 NAMM. So Jim DeCola says that he built 6 prototypes specifically for NAMM in 1996. So Jim DeCola built these 6 prototypes. That's going to lead me back down to when Peavey was in Leakesville, Mississippi. Now at that time there were only 4 people that were building these guitars in the Peavey custom shop, Jim DeCola being one of them. And at that Leakesville, Mississippi location, that custom shop had put out 285 Wolfgangs, according to research, 92 of them special orders. Now, special orders could have classified as a different paint job, maybe a hardtail, or the fretboard possibly being rosewood, amongst other various things, but that's important to know. So later, the Peavey Custom Shop had left Leakesville, Mississippi, and then ended up going to Meridian, Mississippi. And in Meridian, Mississippi, they made 500 Custom Shop Wolfgangs. 130 of them were special ordered. So essentially from 1996 to 2004, because in 2004 Eddie had departed Peavey, well over 200 special order Wolfgangs. And out of those custom shop Wolfgangs, they were, to my knowledge, either painted by Jim DeCola or by a man also known as Jonathan Douglas. Now some of the Jonathan Douglas paint jobs you will actually see out there, and they go for a pretty penny. But again, that also leads me to believe, could this possibly have been painted by Jim DeCola or maybe even Jonathan Douglas? So this is where my buddy Jeremy Hefner comes in the clutch. Jeremy Hefner happens to be able to make contact with Jim DeCola. So according to him reaching out, Jim says that he built 4 specific Wolfgangs that he had painted with stripes. 2 were standards, 2 were specials. So we can rule out at least two of them because we know Eddie, had the special, as you had seen earlier. We know the standard that was at the 96 NAMM, that's now at a Hard Rock, and wherever it knows from that point. But according to Jim, the other two he actually owns, which is a standard and also a special. So could that essentially rule this out as being anything super special?
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Well, we had asked for photos from Jim, and Jim very politely and professionally declined.
We don't negotiate with terrorists.
He has his reasons, but he did not feel comfortable giving up those photos for those two guitars because I was just curious to see maybe what those happen to look like just for historical purposes.
I am not angry. I am in pain, and you put me here.
And that's okay. Go Hoosiers. Now, does that completely rule out this guitar being anything special? Well, obviously, we can also deep dive a little bit further. Now, Jim said, yeah, there's no way that anything else was painted because we happen to ask the question, is there any chance that maybe someone had built one under the table or for themselves, or maybe one just happened to slide out the door or anything like that? But considering Jim was so hands-on and the Peavey custom shop was really small at that time, and considering the serial number on this guitar, just everything, it didn't seem like it was going to happen really under his watch. So furthermore, I had actually reached out to Peavey and I gave them a phone call. I was unable to get a hold of anyone who was really going to be able to help me at this time, unfortunately. Because with the Peavey serial numbers, it seems to me like not everything was really tracked or makes sense with their numbers. Reason being is because when I ran the numbers, and if you actually go on a forum on Facebook, Jeremy, thank you for that, there's actually a list of the serial numbers here that kind of give you a rough estimate as far as maybe when your guitar was built specifically for the Wolfgangs. Now this one actually starts in 9100. So if you happen to run this serial number in there, that's going to let you know that that was one of those first 2 years of the patent pending serial numbers. So this is a very extremely early Wolfgang. Now, when I actually went to the website of Peavey to plug in the serial number, and you can do that, it actually came up as being 1995 or later. But I was told that this was actually a 1996. So, again, for closure purposes, do we really still know? Not exactly.
If you quit right now, you're gonna quit in life. Come on, don't quit. Just try harder.
I recall when I talked to my buddy Sky, he seemed to think that the guitar was originally black and then it was refinished, but we don't happen to know exactly who painted the guitar or any history behind it. So as far as closure on this whole entire subject, it's still undisclosed.
I'm not getting my sex at home. Don't deny me this.
Since Jim DeCola, again being such a credible source and considering he worked so closely with Eddie, as you can see over here, he was at the NAMM show himself. But having said all that, I'd say he's a very credible person considering he worked for Peavey and knew Ed. So I think it's safe to say that this guitar is probably more so a refinished guitar. But if at the same time, considering it's the 5150 paint job, you would sit there and think that, man, if someone was really trying to entice Ed, look no further than one of his most famous guitars being his 5150. Also, at the same time, there are other painted guitars that happen to exist from that era that were painted professionally. Granted, they look different than this. So, is it possible that maybe at Leakesville or Meridian, maybe it's someone had built one and painted itself and had made it out the door? Possible. Could this just been someone that took in their guitar and said, hey, can you happen to paint this for me? And they just did an absolutely and phenomenal job? Also possible. So really, even with the serial number being ran and trying to call Peavey and get a hold of somebody and this and that, you know, who really knows? And that's what makes this guitar so fun, is there is that small possibility that it could be something special. But either way, the bottom line is, for me, it is a very special guitar because I just enjoy playing it. It plays great, smells amazing, and then furthermore, the money went for a great cause. It got me to, reconnect with one of my old friends. It got me to reconnect with this guitar, which brought back some old memories. And it also went towards, my Musicians Institute entry video that I did many years ago. So it's just a fun talking piece. It's got some history behind it. And I absolutely adore this guitar. And another piece of evidence that I wanted to touch on regarding this guitar is I actually ironically found a Pinterest photo of this guitar. But my buddy's been the only one that's owned it for the last, since 2010, 2011. So that's, 14, 15 years. I just thought that was kind of odd. So let's go ahead and touch on the specs on this guitar. So just to refresh, again, it is a basswood body with a maple cap. It does have cream binding on it. As you can see here, it's got just the normal strap buttons. It's not the eye hooks like, Eddie's come accustomed to over the years. It does have a volume and tone capacitor. The volume here on this one, again, I can't remember if it was upgraded or not, but it is that very low friction. I believe it's probably a Born spot or something, but it does exactly what it's supposed to do. The bridge is a Peavey branded, essentially Floyd Rose bridge. As you can see here on the bottom, it's gonna say, what the hell does that say? I don't have my glasses, folks, I'm getting old.
Up yet, Peter? I mean, many blind people lead rich, fulfilling lives.
Oh, I don't know, Brian. I mean, I guess I can give it a shot.
I believe that writing right there says licensed under Floyd Rose patent. Again, the pickups are gonna be hand wound by Peavey to kind of be like the knockup for the DiMarzios. You got your selector switch here, where I believe down is going to be, if I recall, is the bridge and up is the neck. The neck is 22 frets. Again, it's baked bird's eye maple. Smells amazing, as we touched on. Back here, the serial number is branded in. You got Eddie Van Halen's signature burned in here in the headstock. Again, it says patent pending. You have your gold Peavey logo, which I always thought was pretty sleek. Tuners are gonna be those Schaller tuners there with the perloid buttons. Love that look. Again, there's your scoop there. The back of the body here, the back plate where the trim is not recessed. It does happen to stick out. This is recessed, and so is the other cavity here for the toggle switch. As you can see here, it's got that nice little contour there, so you can really get up on the higher frets. It does have that D-tuna there. Not the EVH one just yet, again, because we were waiting on the patent pending for that. It's got the side jack there, like so. Your side dots are black. Your front ones are black. I believe it's an R2 nut. The headstock is ever so slightly tilted back. And the Floyd Rose is a dive only. The trim arm is just a screw-in arm, so it just screws all the way in, and you gotta twirl it around 1,000 times to unscrew it. Now, you've already kind of heard some sound clips of this guitar, but let's go ahead and dive in, and let's go ahead and hear a little bit more of that neck and that bridge. now you're probably wondering, how does this compare to other Wolfgangs? Well, that's going to be a video for another time because I have quite a few Wolfgangs now and I would like to compare them. Please down in the comments let me know which one you would like to see this Peavey standard compared to. I do have, like I said, multiple guitars, but I think one that would come close would obviously be like the EVH Wolfgang of today, whether that be a special or a standard. I do know one that specifically we're going to talk about is this one in comparison to the HP2, because the HP2 is essentially a new old stock of what was left over after the factory and the custom shop had closed, that Peavey had later wanted to take all of the old parts that they had laying around and come up with essentially the Wolfgang again. So we are going to touch base on that one here very soon, because I'm very excited to talk about the comparisons between the two, because again, one is based off of the other. Anyway, guys, I think that pretty much concludes everything. It was a very, very exciting process. I really enjoyed everything. Thank you for hanging out with me this long. If you haven't already, please hit subscribe. It really helps me. It helps, keeps me motivated, keeps me going. I know that you guys want to see more from me. I'm trying to put out as much content as I possibly can, I promise. I am doing my absolute best, but I'm also just a dad working his butt off, got a girlfriend. I got things to do. I got a life, you know, but at the same time, I really enjoy talking to you guys about guitar and everything involved. So please subscribe, please share with your friends that are Ed heads for this specific video. Check out my old videos as well. I go through a lot of guitars. If there's any ones you want to see me talk about more, revisit, whatever, just hit me up in the comments. I'll respond to them all. I love hearing from you guys. So please, till next time, do whatever it is you do. And thank you for watching my Guitars Review. See you next time.